Golden Age stars with disabled children you didn't know about. To the public eye, these Golden Age stars sparkled like untouchable icons, bathed in beauty, wealth, and the illusion of perfect family bliss. But behind the glittering lights and magazine smiles lay shadows no one dared to see. Some bore children born with deformities, illnesses, or hidden disabilities. Some sacrificed every dime of their fortunes, stepping away from fame to fight for their child's survival. Others, crushed by helplessness, fell into silent despair. And then there were those who chose secrecy, masking the truth so tightly that their children carried wounds, both physical and emotional, that never healed. So, who were these idols of Hollywood's most glamorous era? And how much heartbreak did they endure as they watched their own children struggle, robbed of the simple, ordinary lives every child deserves? Dorothy Dandridge, the Oscar star and the child who never grew up. Hollywood in the 1950s, bright lights, glamorous red carpets, and the intoxicating rhythm of jazz. At the heart of it all, one name shimmered above the rest: Dorothy Dandridge. She was the first black woman to break through the walls of segregation, earning an Oscar nomination in 1954 for her breathtaking role in Carmen Jones. The Los Angeles Times crowned her the new Queen of Hollywood, while Life magazine placed her on its cover with a bold declaration, "A new era has begun." But behind the dazzle of the spotlight, Dorothy carried a wound so deep it would shadow her for life. In 1943, she gave birth to her first daughter, Harilyn Suzanne. Dorothy dreamed of a perfect family, of happiness finally within reach. Yet tragedy struck in the cruelest way. A lack of oxygen during birth left Harilyn with permanent brain damage. Doctors at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital delivered a chilling verdict: the child would never speak, never truly understand her mother, never live independently. For Dorothy, the diagnosis was a knife through the heart. Little Harilyn would never whisper, "Mama," never smile with recognition, never feed or dress herself. And so began Dorothy's lifelong battle against despair. She flew to New York seeking top neurologists, paid for experimental therapies, and even turned to risky electroencephalogram treatments, clinging desperately to hope. But each attempt ended the same way, in heartbreak. In 1958, during a live NBC interview, Dorothy was asked about her daughter. Unable to hold back, she broke down in tears. "I can sing for the world," she sobbed. "I can make an audience rise to their feet. But I cannot make my child call me mother." The studio fell silent. Viewers across America wept. For the first time, the public saw beyond the glamour to the unbearable weight she carried. Eventually, Dorothy made the agonizing decision to place Harilyn in a care center. Nurses remembered how, after signing the transfer papers, she collapsed in the hallway, trembling, tears soaking the ink. She clutched her daughter one last time and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I've lost." That wound never healed. Haunted by guilt and loneliness, Dorothy slipped into a world of alcohol and tranquilizers. By 1965, at just 42 years old, she was gone, found lifeless in her West Hollywood apartment, her beauty and brilliance dimmed far too soon. Yet her tragedy was not the only one of that golden era. Only a few years later, Hollywood would be rocked again by the devastating story of Gene Tierney, the luminous star of Laura. And shockingly, the chain of sorrow in her life began with nothing more than a fan sneeze. Gene Tierney, the beauty of Laura and the nightmare born of a sneeze. In 1943, while the world was still burning in the chaos of World War II, Gene Tierney made good on her promise to lift the spirits of American soldiers. She arrived at a New Jersey Army camp in a flowing blue dress, radiant as ever, smiling for the young men about to risk their lives. But in that moment of grace, fate was waiting. A devoted fan, sick with rubella, slipped through security just to shake her hand. One sneeze, one faint cough, and without knowing it, the deadly virus crept into Jean's body. She was 3 months pregnant. Months later, in the delivery room of New York's Lenox Hill Hospital, silence greeted the birth of her first child. Baby Daria was beautiful, but doctors quickly delivered the shattering verdict: congenital rubella syndrome. She was born completely deaf, her eyesight fading, her tiny heart malformed, her brain unable to develop. A child who would never laugh, never run, never even recognize her mother's face. Jean collapsed in anguish, screaming, "It's my fault. I killed my daughter." Words she would later etch into her memoirs, haunting her for the rest of her life. She spent hours at the Southbury training school, clutching little Daria's hand, whispering broken prayers. If only I hadn't stepped from that car. If only I had turned away from that crowd. But life has no rewinds. The grief drove Jean into the depths of depression. She was admitted again and again into psychiatric hospitals in Connecticut, subjected to the harsh electroshock therapy of the era. The luminous star of Laura became a shadow of herself, hiding from cameras, unable to face the blinding flashes that reminded her of her daughter's clouded eyes. In the 1960s, when asked about Daria, Jean's voice fell to a whisper, "I can play hundreds of roles, but I can't play the role of a mother. I am the most wretched of women." The room froze in silence. Her career, once blazing, faded like a candle against the wind. The tragedy of Daria carved itself into Jean Tierney's soul. Beneath the beauty and the glamour lived a woman shackled by guilt and grief, haunted until her final days by a single sneeze that changed everything. Lloyd Nolan. Lloyd Nolan, the shocking truth about his autistic son. To moviegoers of the 1930s and 40s, Lloyd Nolan was the face of justice itself. With his trademark mustache, piercing eyes, and commanding voice, he embodied the fearless detective who never backed down. Variety once crowned him Hollywood's symbol of law and order. But while the world saw an unshakable hero on screen, behind closed doors Nolan carried a secret that broke him to his core: his only son, Jay. From the start, Jay was different. He lived in silence, rarely responding, retreating into a world no one else could enter. In an era when the very word autism was barely understood, even by doctors at the Mayo Clinic, Jay's condition was dismissed as strange, even shameful. Some cruelly branded him insane. In Hollywood, where image was everything, such a child was seen as a blemish to be hidden away. Many stars locked their children in institutions, never speaking of them again. But Lloyd Nolan chose a path no one expected. In 1960, standing before a packed press conference in New York, he choked back tears and laid bare his truth. "I have been powerless before my son's suffering. Perhaps God has too." The room went silent. Hardened journalists later admitted they wept. Instead of burying his pain, Nolan transformed it into a cause. With his wife, he co-founded the National Society for Autistic Children, rallying lawmakers and researchers to finally take the condition seriously. For a Hollywood star to admit to an imperfect child was unthinkable. Yet Nolan's courage ripped the veil from silence. Thanks to him, America first heard the word autism not as a shameful secret, but as a call for understanding. Loretta Young and Clark Gable, the secret love child that shattered a daughter's life. To the world of the 1930s and 1940s, Loretta Young was the embodiment of Hollywood virtue, the angelic face of purity, the good girl raised high on a silver screen pedestal. Her beauty was ethereal, her lifestyle celebrated as moral perfection. Yet behind that carefully polished image lay a devastating secret, one Hollywood conspired to bury for decades. In 1935, while filming Call of the Wild amid the icy wilderness of Washington, Loretta Young fell into the arms of Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood himself, still glowing from Gone with the Wind. Their forbidden passion carried a price. Loretta became pregnant, a catastrophe in an era where a single scandalous headline could end a woman's career. By November, she vanished from sight, with studio whispers claiming lung illness. The truth: she had fled to Europe, secretly giving birth to a daughter, Judy Lewis. Returning months later, Loretta staged her greatest performance, presenting Judy as a child she had adopted out of kindness. The lie was airtight, protected by powerful studios and a complicit press. Judy grew up in a Beverly Hills mansion, yet felt no warmth within its walls. She was never showered with affection, only groomed, corrected, and instructed on how to present herself. Worst of all, her ears, distinctively shaped like Clark Gable's, became the subject of cruel whispers. Night after night, Judy would stand before the mirror, tugging them down in anguish, whispering, "Why am I so different?" The truth remained locked away, even as Judy lived in confusion and quiet despair. Not until the age of 31, long after her marriage, did she finally hear the words that broke her. Clark Gable was her father. In her searing 1994 memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, Judy recalled, "I cried for days until I was exhausted. I felt betrayed. Even my parents denied me. I was the child of shame, a name no one dared claim." That wound never healed. Though she built a career as both an actress and psychologist, Every glimpse of Clark Gable on screen tore her heart open once more. Loretta, meanwhile, guarded her silence until the end. In a rare 1991 interview, she left only a cryptic remark, "Sometimes the truth is too dangerous to speak." To many, that was proof she had chosen reputation over motherhood. This tragic tale exposes the darker side of Hollywood's golden glow, where the preservation of an image mattered more than the life of a child. And while some stars chose to confront their hidden mistakes, Loretta Young and Clark Gable's legacy remains one of silence, secrets, and a daughter forever haunted by the love story that should have been her beginning. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, two names that defined Hollywood's golden age, yet behind the glamour lay a heartbreak that cut deeper than any script. Paul, with those unforgettable ocean blue eyes, was the very image of the American dream. Joanne, graceful and gifted, took home an Oscar with her very first leading role. Together, they were the fairy tale couple, their love story spanning more than half a century while countless Hollywood romances crumbled to dust. If there's any definition of happiness in Hollywood, it is Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, wrote the New York Times. But even fairy tales have shadows. For Paul and Joanne, it was the unbearable tragedy of their firstborn son, Scott Newman. Born in 1950, before Paul's rise to stardom, Scott should have grown up surrounded by love. Instead, he grew up in the crushing shadow of a legend. Suspected of dyslexia, school was a battlefield, letters blurred into meaningless shapes, leaving him in tears. And as his father's star blazed brighter in Cool Hand Luke and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Scott sank deeper into a painful silence. Once, sitting alone in a Beverly Hills bar, he sighed, "Everyone knows my father is Paul Newman, but no one knows who I am." That haunting confession revealed the wound he carried. Alcohol became his escape, then the deadlier white poison that swallowed him whole. In November 1978, at just 28 years old, Scott was found lifeless in his Los Angeles apartment. The coroner's report told the cruel truth, a fatal mix of drugs and alcohol. The headlines splashed across the Los Angeles Times, and for the first time, the unbreakable Paul Newman broke. He collapsed into Joanne's arms, weeping like a child. From their grief, they built the Scott Newman Center, vowing to turn tragedy into purpose by educating youth against the very poison that had stolen their son. And while the foundation saved countless lives, the scar in their hearts never faded. Joanne once whispered to a friend, "This house has laughter, awards, Oscars, but it will forever miss one voice." And as we look back on their story, we are reminded that even Hollywood's brightest legends carry wounds the spotlight can never heal. Clara Bow. Clara Bow, the it girl of the roaring 1920s, left behind more than a glittering legend. She left behind a bitter legacy for her two sons. In the silent film era, Clara wasn't just a star, she was a storm. With nothing more than her sparkling eyes and a sly smile, she could set a theater ablaze. Photoplay once declared, "Clara Bow is the very heartbeat of the decade." But behind the screen's fiery goddess was a fragile soul scarred beyond repair. Her beginnings were steeped in horror. Born into poverty in Brooklyn, Clara grew up in a home consumed by chaos. Her mother, gripped by violent mental illness, would convulse one moment and chase Clara with a knife the next. "I used to lock myself under the bed," Clara later recalled, "terrified she would kill me." Even before she turned 10, she was a victim of unspeakable abuse. With no protector, no savior, she swallowed her trauma whole, scars that would shadow her long after fame arrived. On screen, she radiated sensuality. Off-screen, she was plagued by panic attacks, sleepless nights, and hallucinations that left her screaming into the dark. Doctors prescribed only heavy sedatives, eroding her already fragile mind. And when Clara became a mother, those ghosts did not stay buried. They seeped into the lives of her two sons, Tony and George, with husband Rex Bell. Their home was a pendulum. Moments of joy where Clara smothered her boys with kisses, followed by terrifying swings of rage. Mirrors smashed, doors slammed, and hours of silence behind locked rooms. Neighbors remembered the tension that hung over that house like smoke. Years later, the Los Angeles Examiner exposed the truth that stunned the public. Clara's demons had not only destroyed her peace, they had scarred her children. Relatives revealed Tony and George grew into troubled young men, haunted by tempers, silence, and emotional storms of their own. Tony once confided to a friend, "My mother is a legend, but she is also the greatest fear of my life." That unbearable truth drove Clara away from Hollywood. The woman who once ruled the screen vanished into a small Nevada home, living as a recluse with nothing but tremors, guilt, and the heavy knowledge that her brilliance had also poisoned the childhoods of the sons she adored. When she died in 1965, a diary was found in her drawer. Its pages were filled with one haunting confession: "I'm sorry, my children. I couldn't save myself, and I couldn't save you." Clara Bow's tragedy wasn't just her own. She became one of many silent-era idols, like Harold Lloyd, the great comedian who secretly grieved over his daughter, whose private torment cast a long, painful shadow over the lives of their children. Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd, the hidden shame of a daughter's illness. In the silent era's Holy Trinity, Charlie Chaplin was the poet, Buster Keaton the stoic, but Harold Lloyd was the daredevil who made audiences gasp and laugh at the same time. Who could ever forget that immortal image of him dangling from the giant clock in Safety Last? 1923. He was crowned the king of thrill comedy, a symbol of wit, courage, and audacity. To the world, Harold Lloyd was fearless. But inside his home, fear and sorrow ruled. At the center was his daughter, Gloria. As a teenager, she showed troubling signs, at times childlike and cheerful, then suddenly consumed by violent outbursts, locking herself away, screaming, smashing furniture, collapsing into fainting spells. Relatives whispered the word no Hollywood family dared to admit in the 1950s: schizophrenia. In a time when mental illness was seen as a stain of shame, gossip spread through studio corridors like wildfire. The daughter of comedy's king cursed with a broken mind. Harold, the man who scaled skyscrapers for a laugh, was powerless against this invisible monster. He carried her to psychiatric wards across California, consented to sedatives, and even allowed electroshock therapy, the cruel cure of the era. Each time, Gloria returned emptier, her eyes vacant, her spirit hollow. Sometimes, she did not even recognize the father who once made the world roar with laughter. For Harold, it was the cruelest tragedy of all. And so the Lloyd family chose silence. No headlines. No interviews. It was an unspoken law: protect the image, no matter the cost. Harold Lloyd, the fearless comic who danced with death on film, trembled before the truth of his daughter's illness. That paradox haunted him until his final days, a wound that neither fame nor fortune could ever heal. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi. The name alone could send shivers down the spine. In 1931, as the curtains rose and Dracula premiered, the world trembled at the sight of the dark cape, the piercing eyes, and the hypnotic voice that seemed to echo from the grave. Lugosi, the Hungarian-born actor, became the eternal face of the vampire, immortal on screen, yet trapped by the very image that made him a legend. But his deepest tragedy did not unfold under the bright lights of Hollywood. It was hidden within his own home. Few ever knew that his only son, Bela Lugosi Jr., carried a heavy, heartbreaking burden, a severe stammer. While millions thrilled to Lugosi's booming, sinister voice, at home his little boy struggled just to get words out. Broken syllables, halting phrases, they cut deeper than any critic's review. In the harsh world of the 1930s and 40s, difference was not forgiven. Bela Jr. was mocked, laughed at, humiliated. Once, trying to introduce himself in class, his stammer grew so painful that children burst into cruel laughter. That night, the boy cried in his father's arms while the man who terrified millions wept silently, powerless against his son's pain. Yet Lugosi did not turn away. Unlike many stars who hid their family's struggles, he fought for his child. He carried him from Hollywood speech therapists to New York specialists. At night, in their modest apartment, the father and son faced the mirror together, practicing syllables under the dim glow of a lamp. When Bela Jr., overwhelmed with despair, threw down his book and shouted, "I'll never talk like you," Lugosi wrapped him in a fierce embrace and whispered, "You don't need to be me. You just need to find your own voice." That love and perseverance saved him. After years of therapy, Bela Jr. grew into a confident man, building a successful career as a lawyer. In time, he even became the guardian of his father's legacy, fighting legal battles to protect Lugosi's image and artistry. Yet the scars of childhood mockery never fully faded. Behind every courtroom victory and every hard-won word lingered the memory of those cruel laughs, and the gentle strength of a father who refused to let his son face them alone. Glenn Ford, the cowboy star and the son he couldn't save. Glenn Ford was the golden name of 1940s and 1950s Hollywood. In Gilda, 1946, and countless westerns, he was the image of strength, calm, unshakable, with a cold stare that made enemies crumble. Time magazine once called him the man who never goes off track. But off-screen, there was one thing Glenn Ford could never outrun: the whispers about his only son, Peter Ford. From childhood, rumors shadowed Peter like a curse. Teachers called his name, yet he stood frozen, confused. Soon the tabloids pounced: Glenn Ford's son, deaf or defiant. Photographers captured him sitting silent on playground benches, and society, obsessed with perfection, turned a child's quiet into a scandal. The Ford family never spoke, and that silence only fed the fire. One day, a paparazzo cornered Peter, shoving a microphone in his face and yelling, "Can you even hear me?" Terrified, the boy broke down in tears. The photos splashed across newspapers, cementing the cruel myth. For once, the cowboy who solved everything with a single bullet had no weapon. Glenn snapped, lunging at a reporter and smashing his camera. The Los Angeles Examiner ran the headline, "Glenn Ford goes mad over disabled son." The image of Hollywood's stoic hero shattered overnight. Inside the Ford home, silence became suffocation. Peter later confessed, "I never knew if I truly had a disability. All I knew was that the whole world wanted me to." Between a distant father, a wounded son, and a merciless crowd outside their gates, the Ford family lived in a nightmare Hollywood never dared to script. Jackie Coogan. Jackie Coogan, the child star who never truly grew up. In 1921, audiences wept as Charlie Chaplin's masterpiece The Kid lit up the screen. At its heart was a small boy with a cherubic face and wide, innocent eyes. Jackie Coogan, Hollywood's very first child star, the golden boy who became the very symbol of childhood purity in a deceitful town. For a moment, it seemed fate had crowned him with everlasting glory. But fate never shows mercy forever. As he grew older, Jackie discovered a betrayal far crueler than any Hollywood scandal. His own parents had squandered nearly every dollar of the fortune he had earned as a child. The courtroom battle of Coogan versus Coogan shook Hollywood to its core, leading to the creation of the Coogan Act to protect child actors' earnings. Yet victory on paper could not heal a heart scarred by betrayal. Jackie was left embittered, robbed not only of money, but of trust in the very people who should have sheltered him. And then, life dealt him an even more merciless blow. When Jackie became a father, one of his children was born with devastating neurological disorders. The boy never learned to speak, never showed emotion, sitting for hours lost in silence, sometimes laughing or crying at nothing at all. Doctors gave him no hope. This child will forever depend on others. The boy who once brought joy to millions now faced a grief no audience could ever see. Jackie carried his son from hospital to hospital, from Los Angeles to New York, trying every treatment, speech therapy, even electroshock, only to be met with vacant eyes and endless nights of tears. One night, drunk among old Hollywood friends, Jackie broke down. "They only remember me as Chaplin's boy," he sobbed. "They don't know what I lost. I lost my childhood, my fortune, and now I've lost the voice of my own son." Jackie Coogan's tragedy was not just about stolen money. It was the betrayal of family, the cruel silence of a child who could never say, "Dad." The golden boy's shadow only made the truth more merciless. No fame, no glory, no memory of laughter could ever mend a shattered heart. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester, the power couple of Hollywood's golden age, looked flawless beneath the spotlight. In the 1930s and 40s, no duo seemed more admired. Laughton, the British Oscar winner for The Private Life of Henry VIII, 1933, and Elsa, forever immortalized as the haunting bride of Frankenstein, 1935, walked every red carpet as the picture of success. The Los Angeles Times once praised them as the artistic marriage model of the century. To the world, they were untouchable. But behind the glittering photographs, a secret lived in the shadows. Hollywood wondered why they had no children, yet the truth was far more complicated. Quietly, away from the cameras, Charles and Elsa had adopted a baby. For a brief moment, they knew joy. Then came heartbreak. The child was born with devastating health conditions, spinal deformities, developmental delays, struggles with speech and movement. And in an unforgiving era where perfection was demanded and any imperfection could destroy a career, their child became a dangerous secret. One night in 1936, Charles sat trembling with a glass of wine, whispering to Elsa, "I can face millions of strangers, but I can't face this truth." Elsa wept silently on his shoulder. Not long after, the baby was placed in a private care facility outside Los Angeles, erased from their public lives as though they had never existed. From then on, they never spoke of it again. Yet friends noticed Elsa's quiet sorrow whenever she saw children, and Charles, often drunk, muttered, "I left part of my soul behind." For decades, the secret remained buried, hidden in Hollywood's locked files. Only later did historians uncover this invisible scar on a couple once seen as flawless. It was a reminder that beneath the glamour lay tragedies too heavy to surface. And while Charles and Elsa chose silence, the great Italian star Anna Magnani carried her pain openly. Her son Luca battled polio from childhood. Unlike Lawton and Lanchester's hidden heartbreak, hers was a truth the world could see, a wound that followed her until her final breath.